The golden rule is one of these phrases that is so deeply ingrained in our own lives that it feels like it's always been a part of who we are as people. In fact, I would actually argue that the importance of this golden rule of treating others the way we would like to be treated ourselves far predates Jesus. In fact, the importance of it for us as people of faith, at least of the Christian faith, has nothing to do with it being unique to Jesus. It's not his. Prior to Jesus, it had already been part of Confucianism. It had already been part of Hammurabi's code, so it was Chinese and then Persian, and then even the Greeks had versions of their own of this very same statement. So the uniqueness of it has nothing to do with the Sermon on the Mount or the Bible or any of that. Instead, I think for us, as people of faith in the Christian tradition, the importance of this golden rule lies in what Jesus does with it. He actually takes it far beyond the ethical niceties of getting along with others and trying to create a more livable society. For him, it has to do with the way in which we follow. So let's back up for a moment. Let's dive into this a little bit. When Jesus starts his ministry, in Matthew's gospel, from the moment he's born through his baptism to being tempted by the devil, all that time in the first 4 chapters is preparing him to call disciples and say, "Come and follow me." And when we get to chapter 5, we start the Sermon on the Mount. 3 chapters, virtually, of this sermon that are completely filled with one diatribe after another from Jesus. And by that, I don't mean him shaking his fist at passersby, but of making these arguments for what it looks like to follow. So when he says, "Drop everything in the world and follow me," it should be a pretty scary statement. And in some really important ways, the whole of it hinges on this golden rule. Learning to follow Jesus means learning to follow something that feels as though it's a cultural nicety that we tell our children to follow to make them better students and better citizens. But that's not what Jesus is doing at all. Now, what Christ is up to is so different. He takes this well-known phrase and he gives it this new meaning, and it cannot be taken away from the sermon. So we're going to spend some time here. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was one of the 20th century martyrs of the Christian movement, he fought against the Nazis and actually helped develop and work towards a plan for assassinating Hitler, something he never squared fully with his faith. He felt he had to do it, and yet he had concerns about what that meant for his own life, for his own salvation even. But Bonhoeffer, in one of his most famous writings called The Cost of Discipleship, which much of it is actually about the Sermon on the Mount, when he gets to the section where he talks about the golden rule, he calls it a simple rule of thumb for people who would try to follow in the way of Jesus Christ. So for those of us who have encountered this person in whatever way it is, it could be someone who grew up as a child learning about Jesus and has followed that way of spirituality, or somebody who's brand new, who has somehow read or encountered some understanding of Jesus and what he taught and what his life has meant, and is mesmerized by the beauty of a life that is lived for others. No matter what it is that has brought us to this moment, for those of us who would try to take up the mantle and say, "Yes, I will follow your teachings. Yes, I want to learn this way of being spiritual. I want to learn this way of living." This phrase is a simple rule of thumb, Bonhoeffer says. A simple way to engage, a simple way of living our lives. It is to flip over on its head this idea of I and you. And instead of starting every conversation or every encounter worried or concerned or thinking first and foremost about my own self, Jesus is trying to flip the entire conversation on its head and instead say, no, it starts with the other person. So before we are worried about how we are treated, we first are concerned with how we are treating others. Before we are concerned with our own needs, we concern ourselves with the needs of others. To follow Christ means to effectively drop everything in our own world to follow this man who leads us off into an uncertain future. To trust implicitly in every part of our lives this itinerant preacher from the first century in Galilee. It means to have a view on the world that is centered outside of ourselves because we trust and we know that we have first and foremost already been taken care of. It is to trust that we are loved exactly for who we are already, and therefore we are free to not worry about us anymore. Now, what does that look like on a daily basis? What does it look like for us to treat others the way first and foremost we wish to be treated ourselves? Well, this is a place where I think we're going to get help today from a wonderful little book called Have You Filled Someone's Bucket? And this marvelous little book is one that we have been teaching and reading with our own children, that my spouse and I, Caroline and I, have been reading to our own children. And today, in order to help us understand what this whole idea looks like, I'm going to need a little help.
So what? Wearing pajamas fills our bucket, doesn't it, buddy? Yeah. So I've got my buddy Anderson with me right now, and he's going to show you the book. Have you filled a bucket today? And this one, right here. Am I covering you up? So this book is all about how it is that we together can fill each other's buckets. And what we're going to talk about is, so buddy, can you answer a few questions for me? So what's your favorite, who's your favorite person to fill a bucket for?
Well, did you know airplanes can't fly when they can't fly?
That is true. They can't fly when they can't fly. And do you think that fills anybody's bucket?
Yes.
Yes? Now let me ask you a very important question. When you fill somebody's bucket, do you make them feel special?
Yes.
And when you fill somebody's bucket, do you ever tell them that it makes that they're special?
Yes.
Yes. And do you ever tell mommy and daddy when we've done something that fills your bucket? Do you let us know?
Yes.
And how does that make you feel when your bucket gets filled?
Cuddly with
Makes
Daddy.
you feel cuddly with daddy. I love that. Good. I think you've got something to help people at home understand about filling buckets, don't you? Now, is this your bucket filling bucket? Yeah. And what do you do with your bucket filling bucket?
Filling it.
You're filling it, and do you take some of what's in your bucket and give it to others?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And how does that make them feel? It makes them feel good. It makes them feel better. And so would you say that when you fill other buckets, it gives you feeling empty, or does it make you feel special? I think it makes you feel special. I think you're feeling silly, isn't it? Yeah. So this has been Jeremy and Anderson trying to walk through a little bit of filling a bucket together. Now, this book, Have You Filled a Bucket, is a very good book. It has been put together, is written by Carol McLeod. I encourage everybody who has kids in their lives to pick it up and read it as a way of helping them understand the golden rule, not just about being nice to each other, but as a way of being able to actually live out the golden rule for other people. And this is Anderson and Jeremy saying goodbye.
And so there we have it. So simple a thing that a 4-year-old can easily grasp it. And yet the focus is not on doing good deeds for other people in some basic, ethical instruction, but rather it is about leaving a mark, creating an encounter with someone else that leaves that person changed. So whereas this bucket challenge has become a de rigueur as a way of supporting good causes all around us, the Christian bucket challenge would be rather to treat other people with the love and the support, the respect, that sense of generous charity towards the lives of other people, even forgiveness, really, that we most wish that the world would offer to us. With every single person we meet, it starts first with them and not with us. And so what does this mean for those of us who have faced so many of the trials and tribulations of this life? I think it stands as a challenge for us, really. I think it stands for a challenge for each of us in every single encounter that we have to seek the good for those that we come across. And this is where the real challenge might lie. The fact is, this means that we are to do this even for those that can be the most difficult to care for, the most difficult to offer good things. This notion of bucket filling may be a simple one, but is by no means a cheap form of following Christ. What Christians of today call the golden rule, what Bonhoeffer, like we said earlier, has been calling that simple rule of thumb for people who would follow Jesus, this is a miracle of following through simple acts of kindness and of love, trusting that in this life we are joining in with the work that God is doing to restore all of creation. When I ask if you have filled a bucket today, or if I were to ask, whose bucket are you looking to fill today? What we are asking in that moment is, how are you going to live out following Christ today? How are we going to look beyond ourselves to treat people in every encounter that we come across in a way that we most wish the world would treat us? Thank you.